Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Drew, and I want to welcome you back to Learn How to See Better. It's the only podcast out there that'll actually improve your vision the longer you listen. Okay, so I'm just sitting here taking a moment to myself, and I've got a couple of thoughts running through my mind that I just need to let escape for a moment, because that's important for people to do, to be able to have an ability to express, right? So one of those thoughts is the idea that I learned something pretty powerful at a recent mastermind. And the concept was made very clear by using a game analogy, playing cards, right? In many games, when you play cards with yourself or a group of people, there's a process, right? The interaction with the cards, you and the cards. It's a game, right? And what's your next move? And the thing about it is that you're constantly either picking up cards or putting down cards, right? There's constantly cards exchanging hands in any kind of card game. Something has to happen with those cards. So most times we're picking up cards and we're putting down cards. Sometimes you're trying to collect more cards. A lot of times you're trying to get rid of your cards. And one of the lessons that was driven home was using that analogy with the card game and how we learn things and how we're able to express things and how we're able to transfer that knowledge, to transfer what we picked up, what we gain. And sometimes we may have or develop or find ourselves in a place where we've been just picking up a whole lot of cards, but we're not putting any down. We're not putting any cards down. And when you think about the idea that if, what we were picking up and not putting down, like what would make that bad, right? Because if you're picking up everything and not putting it down, that'd be called hoarding. And hoarding's a bad word, isn't it? So you think, okay, if you're picking up, you're putting back down, you're having this exchange. Let's just say now instead of cards, it's knowledge. Think about that for a moment. If you're just picking up knowledge and you're not putting it down or putting it out there or sharing it or exchanging it with another player in some way, shape, or form, then effectively you've not really done any good to the universe, especially if you don't do anything with that knowledge whatsoever. I think probably the only thing worse that would be the only thing worse you could do besides taking the knowledge and keeping it, not doing anything with it. Well, yeah, I said that backwards. Picking up all the knowledge and not sharing it, not helping others with it. The only thing worse than that is not helping yourself, not taking something and doing with it for you in whatever shape or form is appropriate, right? And in some instances, you may pick up information along your travels that it's like, okay, well, that doesn't really apply to me. And so I was thinking about that recently because, I feel like I've been in a knowledge quest, a growth quest for, over a decade now, right? And some of the challenge is you might go off and learn, I don't know, maybe you decide you want to go learn about dinosaur bones because it's really interesting and you want to have a better understanding of the earth and where dinosaurs came from and what that must have been like 100 million years ago. Okay. So that might be something that you have an interest in, something that you pursue, something that you hold close to the heart, and something that you value. But if you're finding all this rewarding from this gaining of knowledge, it's going to be limited if you don't just eat. You got to process, and what comes in comes out, right? So I think what comes in you by way of knowledge is only useful if it comes out of you in some way, shape, or form. So whether you're teaching someone or whether you're demonstrating something or whether you're practicing, you're going through those motions, implementing and making changes or taking action on that which you acquire, right? That's where that value begins to manifest itself or begins to really show up in the real world. So my dilemma is, how do I go about doing that more? Because I find that in every area of life, as we experience, life is like a multi-spoke wheel, right? You have different elements of your life. You can broad categorize them into, you've got the relationships you have with yourself and others, your relationships category. Then there's your the personal side, right? Everything that's you and your health physically and mentally and spiritually, right? And then, there's the wealth component, right? The elements of how you support, sustain yourself, whether it's food, shelter, clothing, assets, right? So as you think about all those things that you learn, and how some of them are so valuable, but as you pick things up over time, not only do we sometimes, again, find ourselves not sharing that information, these findings, these gold nuggets with other people, but there's also instances where we're not utilizing that knowledge that we've obtained for ourselves. And if you haven't shared it and you're not actualizing it for yourself, then is it not then become useless? I don't know. What would you say? So when I really dig into it a little bit further, it's like, okay, I was just thinking about uh, what about the things I picked up along my journey with regards to, let's say, health as of late. Um, in the last probably 3 years, um, I've been more intentional about my own health than probably any time I can think of, outside of when I was, playing competitive athletics. And there's different value placed on the efforts and the intention that you put around that. Just as far as our general well-being, for long-reaching views. I mean, it's crazy to think that ever since I was probably maybe 7 years old and would start thinking forward to the future, you start to see yourself getting bigger. You're not a 4-year-old anymore. You look forward to being a 10-year-old. You're not a teenager. You're not a grown up, right? But you start to be able to project a little bit of vision and have ideas for what your life is going to be like. And I remember thinking back one time, it might actually have been my 7th birthday or somewhere around there, but thinking, wow, birthdays were the coolest thing. Specific to my birthday, I remember my parents had a big party for me, and it was crazy to think that, when you're a kid, you got some neighborhood friends that come by, but a lot of times in your younger years, the parents are really the ones that that benefit from the birthday party. They're inviting their friends to come by, so it is celebration, family, friends, relatives, all that good stuff. And I remember, for whatever reason, I was running around telling everybody on my 7th birthday, hey, it's my birthday, what are you going to give me? Or something to that effect. And a lot of people that had just showed up to hang out were like, I don't know, here's $2, kid, get out of here. Yeah, happy birthday. Here's $5. And I remember feeling like I cleaned house, because at the end of the day of my birthday, it was like, I think I made $51, at $51 in cash. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm rich. And it was just so exciting. And I thought, oh my gosh, every birthday from this point out is going to be like hitting the lottery. And then, you just start thinking forward, and that's a little fun exercise. And then, later I remember thinking like, wow, one day I'm going to have a 100th birthday party. I'll be 100 years old. And I had this vision of it where it's like all your family and friends around. And of course, when you're a kid envisioning this, you're bigger and older. You're not like really looking, probably like what a 100-year-old might look like. But it was just the most fun time. And then everybody celebrates and you have a great time, cake, candles, all the fun things and gifts, and just all the people that matter. And then, it was kind of like after the party's over and everyone goes home, at the end of the evening, you sit back in your favorite rocking chair and just kind of reflect on, how awesome everything has been. And then, at the end of the evening, when you go to the sleep, go night night, you just drift into that peaceful, perpetual sleep. And it was one of those things you kind of think about, like, wow, what a nice, pleasant, peaceful way to have the story end. And then, I don't remember what, that was just kind of end of the story, no different than in the movie for a kid. And sometimes it's something so simple that you just kind of imagine life. And it's crazy to think that what you recognize now, I'm just over 40 years old currently at the time of this recording. And as I sit and think, 100, wow, that's awesome. Because all through my life, as I've thought about getting older, I've had this image come back. My 100th birthday. And, it's just the funnest time, quality time with loved ones, and then when the party's over and music ends and turn off the lights and go to sleep, that's, that's all she wrote for this chapter, right? And so when you think about that now, um, present day, it's 2020, I'm 40 plus, it's like the idea is awesome that still is held true in my mind, because with all the evolutions, if you want to use the word, of mankind, and progress is made, and technology and ability to get the most out of life, right? Get the most out of life, I think, is here now more than it's ever been before. But I also recognize the fact that, there's the other side of the coin, where it's like, okay, well, it's not like that's just a free ticket that, just because we got high speed internet, you're good to go to 100. To be able to download all the fun songs you need to reminisce all the way into up to the triple digits. It's one of those things where it's more of a scenario where you have to stop and think and say, well, if, I want to be able to have that party, what does that require, right? Well, one, it's like, okay, you obviously need to make sure that you got to take care of yourself long enough to be at that point, right? In that vision, I wasn't in a wheelchair, I wasn't hooked up to a machine, I didn't not remember everybody around me, right? So if I want to be able to preserve that, I have to take care of my mind, I got to take care of my body, right? I got to take care of my spirit. And was just thinking about that recently. Somewhat for the fact that I think we all recognize that there is an element of mortality that's a part of that cycle of life, that we, pleasantly, hopefully manage to kind of put in the back of our mind as we go through our days, and make the most of our days, right, in a positive sense. But in reality, I think the thoughts of the cycle of life kind of slip to the background until they become readily apparent, or slap us in the face, or shock or surprise. There's been instances where post high school and college, I've had classmates you end up hearing about, and it's like, oh my goodness, we're only X years old, right? People in their 30s or even their 20s, right? Surprisingly leaving this earth, and it's like, oh my goodness. And some of them were tragic in that they were unexpected or couldn't have been prevented, and in other cases there might have been some unique hereditary thing, in some cases it might have been something else. But what's also recognized is just the fact that not everybody's a tank, right? And that we are fragile beings that must be cared for from the standpoint of sustaining for the long run, right? You see a lot of the professional athletes that are banged up and beat up. They gave some of their best years as gladiators, on a football field or in a sports arena, and it takes its toll, right? So they have to be additionally conscious about how they add best practices into their life to maintain, because if your knees are knocked up and your nose has been broken 6 times in 10 years, and you got just adjustments, right? I think of the sportscaster, I think his name's Booger McFarland, he's big dude's got these big old hands, he's on TV, and it's like his finger, goes at like a 90-degree angle from the rest of his hand, because it's, been busted and, blown out so many times on the gridiron. And, but, I would imagine there's probably things he's been able to do to alleviate some of those ailments, right? Because our bodies get broken up in the course of life if we don't treat them well. And the idea takes me back to a song that I heard about 20 years ago. It was a hip-hop track called Be Healthy by the group Dead Prez. And it was a very melodious, nice paced track where, the guy's not necessarily lecturing, or, it's not, an aggressive, type of song or anything like that. But he's just saying be healthy. And it was just very, basic, basic elements of health that have been around for days, weeks, months, years, decades, centuries, right? Just taking care of ourselves, owning the responsibility for the care of this structure that we occupy for, if we're lucky, 100 years or more, right? Hopefully we're lucky in that scenario, but to get there, if you've ever wanted to maintain or prolong this existence as long as possible, it's like, okay, that has to be baked into our overall plan, our overall vision, and, being healthy and taking care of ourselves. And I'm actually thinking, like today, right now, April 1st, 2020, no April Fool's jokes, right? If I were having a conversation and someone were, asking me the question, what are you doing to be healthy right now? Right? Because there's a lot of different views, opinions, approaches, strategies, methodologies, information, facts, fiction, opinion, the whole gamut, right? Pros, cons to each, opportunity cost. I mean, it gets deep, right? And so as not to overcomplicate things, because one of my mentors once told me, most things are simple. It's the people that complicate them. I had to really give pause and ask myself, what I feel the most important elements above and beyond anything are. Because you know what? There are going to be elements of our existence that we don't have total control over. What's that one quote say? It's I've learned that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. It's your attitude. And so I think as we look at attitude and mindset, and positive outlook, positive outcome, those types of ideas, I think that the most important component to being healthy starts up top. It starts in our head. It starts in our heart. And it goes back to the idea that we will encounter facts that require us to make decisions or require us to take actions, right? But a lot of it's driven by, again, where's your head at? What's the focus on those facts? Or are you going to lean more towards faith in a good positive outcome, or more towards fear and a negative outcome? And I think that knowing that that is where all of our decision points and our life existence with regards to like what we decide to do and how we want to exist and experience life, it's through our perceptual filters, how we view the world, what our response to stimuli is. You keep touching a hot stove, burn your hand. Maybe you got a gas stove and fire. Maybe when you're older, you see fire and you're like, something in your brain's like, oh, get away from that. You've experienced pain before. And so I think that in general, like most of my life I spent thinking in my head was that as long as you take care of yourself physically, that like the rest of you is taken care of, right? And so, you realize that can only get you so far, because if you've taken care of one category, but you've just completely neglected another, that's going to show up, right? That's going to show up in its, in your existence. Back to the old age thing, right? There was a conversation I'd been involved in once. It's like, okay, as things deteriorate, would you rather lose your mind or lose your body? You want to be quick-witted and still able to remember every detail, but you're in a wheelchair and you're all decrepit, or would you rather be able to move around and still be able to dance and do the jig, but you can't even remember, your kids' names or your spouse's name, right? There's both of those. It's like, do you want to freeze to death or burn to death? None of those really appeal regardless, but it's like, if you had to pick the lesser of the two evils, I'd have to keep my mind. I'd have to keep my mind, most definitely, because if I'm not able to enjoy this experience, and understand what's going on, it's like I'm not even here. It's not even a real thing. But preservation of mind as the number one thing, if you can have the consciousness to think clearly, right? To have that tool that's going to allow you to drive your physical elements in such a way that's going to be sustaining. If you have clear conscience, if you have clear thinking ability, consciously and subconsciously, it's going to be able to make the spiritual connections necessary to be strong in your spiritual faith, in your belief, right? You got to have strong belief when you go out and look to live to 100, right? Because, any day you can walk outside of your house and there goes a bus and you weren't looking both ways, or some other unexpected calamity. There's a lot of living to do to get to 100. And so being healthy, making sure that you're able to make good decisions, Um, I think that there's instances where it's like if you've ever made a decision that could have put your life in jeopardy, but you didn't give the threat the level of respect that it deserves, it's like, wow, what a error in judgment. And that's from the kid that didn't look both ways before he crossed the street, even though they've been told, right? To the 21-year-old that's, just meeting up with a few friends and they're just celebrating and, you know, they don't do a whole lot of drinking, but this one particular time and those decisions about do you get the Uber or the Lyft or go ahead and drive home because it's only a couple of miles down the way, right? These are decisions that might alter the course of things in time, if not properly evaluated, measured, weighed out, and decided upon. So I think number one being the mental, and that's probably the number one thing that I'm doing right now to take care of myself, and that is driving traction in physicality, spirituality, just looking at everything in its totality, get it all together, right? What better time than now? Hey everybody, I want to thank you for tuning in to Learn How to See Better. It's the only podcast out there that'll improve your vision the longer you listen.